some claims made during a trial, the Snowtown murders, or better known as the barrel body murders. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all my great friends out there. Thank you for subscribing and liking and watching. It has been so much fun to make these videos and just a pleasure. I love doing the ASMR and I love doing the crime in a whisper. It is not in any way a, insult to the families. It is just the way I like to hear true crime. So I also like to deliver the content that way as well. There is a disclaimer. This is a pretty horrific case. This is also my third video, and I did a 3-hour video today, and it just did not work out. So this one is just going to be a synopsis, and I will work on another video. There's just so many people, so many cases, so many ins and outs. It's just, I think it would just sound too confusing. So I'm just going to read my summary of this story. So I just want to briefly go over the Snowtown trial. Was one of the biggest and longest in South Australian legal history, running for 11 months. The hearing from 227 witnesses and costing the country about $15 million. Wagner was convicted of 10 murders, and the trial heard gruesome details about his crimes, including what he and Bunting had done, and that they had cooked the flesh of the last victim. The smell from the Snowtown vault was so bad that the police needed breathing gear. More than 200 suppression orders were imposed during the case, and a record number of victim impact statements were presented to the courts. Prosecutors had alleged that there was 12 victims, but that charge was dropped. At the trial, the jury was unable to reach a verdict on whether Bunting and Wagner had murdered Susan Allen, whose dismembered body was buried in 11 garbage bags in the backyard of Bunting's former Salisbury North home. Bunting was the ringleader, and he was also convicted of all 11 murders. He is also serving multiple life sentences without parole. It was revealed in 2017 that Mark Ray Ayden, who was not convicted of murder but was convicted of 7 counts of assisting the other 3 men to dispose of the bodies, was seeking parole. What happened? What happened? What happened? What happened to this man? How did he become so horrible? Justice Martin also took the unprecedented step of directing a jury not to listen to a piece of music by American band live. After sentencing Marcus Johnson, the father of victim David Johnson said it was totally unacceptable that the judge could not ensure the killers remained in jail for life. Some of the men's victims were killed because they knew too much about the crime. Some were tortured and made to grovel before being killed. Others were dismembered afterwards. But why? Some were killed because they were pedophiles, because they were homosexual, and just because they were there and were convenient. Wagner and Bunting benefited financially from their crimes as well by claiming the Social Security benefits of most of their victims. They forced some of their victims to record bizarre and odd recordings to their families, telling them that they never wanted to speak to them again. Phrases on tapes before they were killed, and these recordings were played over the telephone to concerned relatives and friends in an attempt to convince them the person was still alive. So they had recorded this and they kind of manipulated it with a software program that John had so that it actually sounded different than the time before. So Bunting and Wagner often boasted and laughed about what they had done and kept their victims' belongings and paperwork in their homes and cars, which it was that he was fueled by, because he was a victim. He held a secret. He was a victim of sexual abuse and molestation from a friend's neighbor. Ironically, as the friend's father had caught him, he actually ran him out the house. The guy who was molesting the two boys jumps on a motorcycle and immediately is killed because he was going too fast and dies. So John also is another child when he was 15 that he never spoke of, never talked to, and if he did, it was in a very angry manner, and that was a little girl. And really, after that, John never had another relationship that was meaningful again. But he had a lot of friends. He had lots of friends, male friends. I mean, people liked him. He said he was a jolly guy, he was a good bloke. He was, he presented himself to a crowd pretty well because he was articulate, but also he was little, small framed. He kind of had this squeaky little voice, like he was going through puberty. So people assumed that he was a lot younger than he was. He had long hair. That kind of aided to that. When he was of the age of 21, people thought he was more like 16. Robert Wagner, also a victim of a pedophile, Barry Lane, that lived down the street. And Wagner and Bunting became friends with Lane, and as Bunting pulled Wagner away from Lane, basically used Barry as a resource to find out who was the pedophile who was coming to his house to have sex with him, and this pushed Bunting's to make a spider board, which was a board kind of like a murder board, where all the suspects are listed, and then red or yellow or whatever yarn is connected to each of the victims. Well, this was the same thing, and I'll put a picture of it up there. But basically, once John said, it's a go, let's get this one, and he'd point to one, they would make his life hell, graffitiing his house, torturing, calling him names, following him, just basically bullying that poor person until they were ready to move on to somebody else. So, now, he killed quite a few people. Obviously, he killed 11 people. His first one was a young teenage boy, Clinton, that once he actually smashed his head in and beat him so hard he crashed the front of his skull. He then enlisted his friends Barry and Robert to help him hide the body in his backyard in 203 his address that he had lived in at the time. I can't remember it on top of my head, but he actually had dug this big hole that a ladder could fit down, and then it opened up so it could hold rainwater, and he put the body there. Within the next year, he had killed Suzanne, who was a lover, and also she had her friend. She was hosting a Christmas party for these two boys that were molested by Davies, this other man, Ray Davies, who was Suzanne's ex-fiance. And Suzanne, when she found this out, that when she was at this Christmas party with these two boys, that Ray had actually molested these two boys, that she got enraged, and he didn't take long for him to disappear. But after torturing him for hours in the bathtub, beating his genital area to the point where they swelled and he was half dead, they brought him to her house, took him out of the car where she was standing there in shock, and he said, "Look what I brought you, your present," and then proceeded to accessory. She was a murderer. But it wouldn't last long because Bunting dumped her, as he was actually in a relationship with Elizabeth, and could not have, she was getting too clingy. So basically he killed her after her daughters, kept coming up to his house where he lived in a different part of town, or a different town, and giving him notes from Suzanne. And he's like, Suzanne, it's over, please leave me alone. And she wouldn't listen, so she had to die. She had died like Davies, pretty much. She was asphyxiated. He strangled her and, didn't really torture her all that much, just killed her because she knew too much. And he didn't want a relationship with her, for sure. So, now, Jamie Velasquez was molested by his mother's husband, a Greek man, and that came over to Australia on a boat and met up with Jamie's mother. Now, Jamie's mother already had a son, Troy, so that was his half-brother, and the stepfather had molested both his stepson and his real son. So he had to be also taken care of by Robert and John. So James was actually taken by John when he came into his mother's life, because he was like, oh my god, this is a man I can trust. They had a great relationship. He said he hated gays, Bunting said he hated gays, he hated pedophiles, and James was quick to agree. He even confided that to his half-brother, Troy Yode, and had molested him when he was only 13 years old. So Jamie was not only molested by his father, he was also molested by his half-brother. Bunting responded by setting up Yode's murder. The group visited Yode's house, dragged him from his bed, tormented him, then killed him, and disposed of his body. David Johnson, James's own step-brother, later became a victim as well. Not all the bodies were disposed of in the same way, but the majority of them were dismembered and buried in a very particular manner. May 1999, police discovered the remains of 8 victims stored in huge plastic barrels of acid in a shed. Sometimes 2 bodies were shoved into a single barrel. He would actually chop these up from his experience at the slaughterhouse. He would dismember them to the point where he could get up to 3 bodies in a barrel. And the victims' bodies would just fall apart after a while, and they would turn into like this slushy mush. The grisly findings by the police led to the murders often being referred to as the bodies in the barrel case. By the end, at least 12 people had died. One of the last victims that was killed before the police caught on was the wife of one of the killers, Elizabeth. Ayden, Bunt, and Warner went over to her house while she was gone, when her children and husband were out. Bunt this is the second woman that he apparently cared for, that he murdered. First it was Suzanne, now it's Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is the one with all the children that Mark was married to, and Bunting was in a relationship with. So she was tortured and killed in her own home before her body was put into a barrel. When Mark was later shown his wife's remains in the barrel, he supposedly laughed and did not appear upset. Unfortunately, say she was close enough to the group that her disappearances alerted the police to the fact that something might be up. And really, that was his last victim. The last two victims were really his downfall. And the bodies in the barrel, some serial killers will actually keep trophies where he would keep the whole body remains, and it just smelled. You have to keep moving them from place to place, and that was not good because it made people curious, and curiosity killed the cat. So most victims were killed in their own homes, which is really frightening. And he knew his victims. He knew every single person except for one that he just barely knew. But for the most part, this man killed the women he loved, apparently. He killed the people that he loved, apparently. He killed Troy. He killed just so many people that he was supposed to be friends with. When he killed Barry, that he was called this rock spider. Now on its wall of spiders, there was this special little place for Barry because he knew Barry was a pedophile. He knew Barry had molested, a lot of his friends, including Robert, which was his number one right-hand man. I mean, he felt like he was saving the world in a lot of ways from this guy when he killed Barry. But this does not give him the right to kill them. Now, some people probably say that that's a good thing. Ray Davies had molested a couple little boys and then also would watch, these school-age kids and, masturbate, while they were driving by, but, or walking by, but, it's kind of a strange thing because, you want to say, well, that's not right, but are you willing to kill that person to make it right, or do two wrongs make it right? I don't know. I don't believe so. I mean, I couldn't do it, but I can see how angry people got. And honestly, if John and Robert had killed just pedophiles, that they hadn't killed innocent people like their wives and people that knew too much, or that they drug into the situation, then that would have probably been a better argument for them. I'm not saying that's an argument, I'm just saying it might have been a better argument for them, but because they killed, it became an addiction. That it was a bloodthirst for John to kill. You would pick them out, he'd be like, oh, I want to kill him, or there would be no rhyme or reason. This poor kid that looked like he was kind of light in the loafers, I guess you'd say. He wore these real fluffy pants, or I can't remember what he called it, but the kid was a great kid. He got good grades, he was going into the Air Force, and he was going to celebrate with his friends, and he sent Jamie over there to say, hey bud, let's go. I've got, I'm working on my car, I just need you to help me. And then when he got there, the same thing happened. He was tortured and brutally murdered for no reason, and John didn't barely know this kid at all, and that was so sad. So then these bodies in a barrel, obviously 11 victims, 12 victims, a couple were buried, but many were not, and they were in these barrels, and he had to move them to Marcus's house, and he had to move Mark's house, and then he had to move them out to Snowtown, and that's where Simon lived, his friend Simon. And really, it was an old farming town that really had nobody left in it, and John used this town as they kind of like scoped it out was a bank with a vault up there that was sealed. And so he took the money that he was getting from the victims' pensions, and he rented this basically for their tomb. And the smell when they pulled up in the 4x4 to bring the bodies in the barrels, the smell was so bad that when Simon came out to talk to John, he couldn't even get near the 4x4. He's like, what is that smell? And John's like, oh, it's just rotting kangaroo. It's just kangaroo meat. Don't worry about it. And apparently that's a good excuse in that part of the world. Here in Florida it would not be, but yeah, apparently in Australia that's pretty common to carry around dead kangaroos in barrels. I don't know. So Simon said okay, and so what happened was John, he got the bodies out of the 4x4 and rolled them into the safe. Closed and sealed the safe, but the problem was that this smell was so nauseating and just noxious. I mean, it was so bad that it seeped out from this huge sealed vault that the bank that was once, a bank had used to hold their money. And you know how thick a bank vault is. It's huge. So you can see that, these bodies were just decaying faster than John was thinking they might. And in one account, Jamie said, Dan, these bodies are really, they smell really bad. And John did not have a good sense of smell. So he was like, alright, just hang up another, air freshener, like that's gonna help. But then Simon got curious, and as they're literally skinning one of their victims, Simon comes up and he, knocks on the door, and John is holding a piece of flesh from him that's dangling from his hand, and he kind of hides it. And Simon's like, oh my god, what is that smell? And he's like, oh, they're just the bodies of the kangaroos. And he's like, alright, man, whatever, just, keep them down here, don't get near the house. And John and Robert would actually go back, and Jamie would go back to this guy Simon's house and shower in his shower, okay? That would bother, oh my god, that would just gross me out. But I'm really funny about that. But they would shower in his shower and get rid of the smell, and they never really questioned it because they thought it was coming from the dead carcasses of the kangaroo, which I guess if you worked in a slaughterhouse, then that wouldn't be too far from the truth. So what happened to these young guys? As I said earlier, John got 10 life sentences. He was really the ringleader. He will have no chance of parole. The others, Robert got similar. He won't have a chance of parole. But the rest have chances of parole because they felt really like they were being led by John, that they really had no choice at one point. I mean, and I don't think they really knew the truth, that John would kind of set them up. Like, oh, come here, I want to show you something. This is what he did to Jamie. So as Jamie's standing there, John is taking off these pillows, and he's like, oh my god, that's my stepbrother. What the hell? Or my half-brother, what the hell? And, excuse me. It's like, he kind of now railroaded him into helping him cut him up and, hiding the evidence. So then he's an accessory. Why not be a murderer? Because the next one, he made Jamie, actually do the killing. However, here's another thought. Jamie had left a few times because he couldn't take it and was afraid he was going to be killed. I mean, every time he saw John, he was thinking, this is it, this is the last time I'm going to be alive. So you could, just in that sentence alone, you can kind of see the fear building. And like I said before, at first it was just an anger against pedophiles and child molesters, and then it became more of a control thing, and then it was a bloodlust thing, and they got addicted to it. It became an addiction to just torture these poor men, torture them. This one, I'm not even, you know what, I'm gonna pass over that because I will leave the copy of the book you can read, but the details are absolutely horrific how they tortured this poor people, especially a couple of them, and it gradually got worse. I mean, I can't even begin to understand that kind of cruelty. I don't know. So, well, but why did John? So let's go back to the beginning. Why did John think that homosexuals, we know he had a bad experience when he was a kid. We know that, but what were his parents like? Well, Jan and Tom, when John was born in 1966 in Brisbane, Australia, loved their kid. I mean, they weren't rich, but they wanted to give him everything that they possibly could that they never had. They worked very hard, and they didn't abandon him. He had a normal childhood, but he was a victim of this abuse, and you could see it. By the time he was 13, he was creating a lot of hassle, and eventually he just, by the time he was out of high school, he just, menial jobs were fine. He didn't have that ambition, and maybe that's what sexual abuse does to people. It takes away something inside of you that is so hard to get back, that innocence and that shame and guilt, and just to convince somebody it is not their fault is almost impossible, because it just is always in the back of their mind, I guess. I don't know. But how about Robert Wagner? He was too considered a pretty good kid. I mean, he did have some, didn't come from a great background, but pretty much had a normal childhood. But what this case really taught people about the Australian child laws is that just the amount of people that have kids and then just get rid of them like they're really nothing, like they're dolls, and push them into the foster system, or the have them adopted out and then have more kids and do the same thing. I think this case really brought to fruition or into the light that this is a more severe problem than they thought it was. So that is the one thing that came out of this case that was good. Also, I don't think they realized the kind of abuse that was going on in that area at the time. I didn't read one social worker came out to check on a child system, but I know it was a poor neighborhood, but you would think that somebody would be there checking up on my stomach, of course, these kids, and in some fashion, these kids are running away at 12 and 13 and surviving out there, apparently able to get jobs or, sell drugs or get drugs and not be arrested. I kind of got the impression that where they lived in Adeline was it was like, okay, that kids were, they knew that people were, basically molesting them and kind of luring them into this sexual life as a young child, that Barry Lane was doing this, and they had to have known because everybody knew, and I can see where, and the police believed every story that John had. John made sure that his victims had a card to make sure that they, it was very profitable for him. $95,000 in money that he had taken from these victims in that short period of time. I think is quite a bit. It paid for pretty much everything. He always was renting 2 or 3 homes. He never really had a serious relationship, other than Veronica Tripp, which he was married to, but then, it just didn't work out, and especially, when he was then sleeping with all his friends' wives, then killing them. That just very strange, and kind of justifying it. I don't know. Anyway, this is a very bizarre, twisted, complicated case. I was just reading it to you. I had taken all these notes, 80 pages of notes. And by the time I had looked at the video, I was like, nobody is going to understand this. To simplify it, there was basically 4 main people that helped John. And his number 1 guy was Robert Wagner. Suzanne, who had become a killer, he killed. Elizabeth, who he was with at the time, and he ended up killing her. And, Ray Davies, and, he was a molester. He was engaged to Suzanne, and then you had Barry kind of in the middle. Like I'm saying, he was the pinnacle of all this, the catalyst that kind of, he gave all the information that John would ever need to fuel his addiction and to justify it in his own mind if he didn't know exactly who was doing the child molestations or the pedophilia, or, he found this all out through Barry. And of course, once Barry was of no use, then he had to go. He enlisted people, his neighbors and friends, to help him, and nobody said a word. I think that's why they all got such severe sentences, because at any time somebody could have said something, but I just can't believe, I can't believe this, because like I just said, there was very little police presence. The police believed John's stories. This one victim did actually tell his significant other, or cousin, told his cousin, and he had to kill him because, not that at the time this was plausible, but the more she thought about it, she's like, yeah, this is kind of strange, and she started to believe it. So, he had to kill because it was such a transient place, there weren't a lot of people that stuck around. Like, if my neighbor would go missing, I would be worried. I would definitely be like, no, they are always there. You don't understand. They're not going anywhere. They don't do drugs. You know, I would be very concerned. But these people, even the wives and husbands of these people, didn't really offer that much concern because they had done it before. Especially Elizabeth, she was, it was so many different men and had so many different children that she kind of gave up. That's the kind of people that lived there, that they just went from person to person and, had to change their names. That's another reason I didn't really want to read everything, because, I started to confuse myself. I was like, wow, like, these people changed their names more than once to either run away from the law, run away from ex-lovers, just because, they just wanted a new life. And, and a lot of drugs. Just a lot of these people that had gotten into these relationships with, sexual relationships with other men, with pedophiles. They couldn't deal with their lives. So they would go and they would disappear for years at a time. And so when John said, oh yeah, he found out something and he's off, he won't be back for probably 4 or 5 years, the police thought that was completely plausible. And when the police, Susanna was really strange. Why would, her brother started calling her cousin and her sister, it's like, okay, she may have not, may have had different men in her life, but she wouldn't have left her children and family for that long without calling. I don't recall reading that she had any drug problems or history. So, this was a very expensive case, a very sad case for so many victims. And it's just, I think, more disturbing because of how they died. Brutal he got towards the end. And that he just killed without any scruples whatsoever. He didn't have the same frame of mind as he did before. Anyway, have a great evening, great morning, great afternoon, wherever you are. I